The coffee in the hospital cafeteria tasted like burnt rubber, but Garrett Chen drank it anyway. It was 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. The dead hours when emergency rooms saw their strangest cases and most desperate people. He'd been on shift for 14 hours, had 6 more to go, and his scrubs still had blood on them from a car accident victim he'd helped stabilize an hour ago. Being a pediatric nurse wasn't supposed to look like this. When he'd chosen this career path 8 years ago, fresh out of nursing school and full of idealism, he'd imagined comforting sick children, holding hands with worried parents, being the kind of caregiver who made a real difference. Instead, he spent most shifts drowning in paperwork, managing understaffed chaos, and watching children suffer because their parents couldn't afford proper care or were too addicted to notice their kids were sick. The idealism had died somewhere around year 3. What remained was exhaustion and questions. Questions about whether any of this mattered, whether he mattered. Rough night? A voice beside him. Garrett looked up. A woman stood there, blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that didn't belong in a hospital at 3 a.m. She was beautiful in that effortless way some women managed. No makeup that he could see, but perfect skin, perfect features, perfect everything. "Every night is rough in the ER," he said. She smiled, sat down without invitation. "Eleanor Hartwick, I'm a pharmaceutical sales rep. Just finished a late meeting with your hospital administrator about a new pain management protocol. Garrett Chen, pediatric nurse, currently contemplating whether my degree was worth the student loans." Eleanor laughed. Not a polite laugh, but genuine. "I had the same thought about my MBA. 50,000 in debt to learn how to sell drugs to hospitals." She sipped her own coffee, made a face. "God, this is terrible. Welcome to hospital cafeteria coffee. It's medicinal, keeps you awake through pure spite." They talked for 45 minutes. About jobs, about Portland, about the strange liminal space of being in your late 20s and wondering if this was all life would be. Work, debt, exhaustion, repeat. Eleanor was easy to talk to, smart, funny. She understood the hospital world without being part of its crushing machinery. She made Garrett feel seen in a way he hadn't felt since his brother Thomas died 3 years ago. "I should get back," he finally said, checking his watch. "My break ended 20 minutes ago. Can I give you my number?" Eleanor asked. No games, no pretense, just direct. "Yes," Garrett said. "Yes, you can." 3 days later, they had their first date. What Garrett didn't know, what Eleanor would never tell him during their courtship, was where she'd come from. Eleanor Marie Hartwick had been born Eleanor Marie Kovach in a double-wide trailer outside Eugene, Oregon. Her mother, Rachel Kovach, was a meth addict who'd had 3 children by 3 different fathers, none of whom stuck around. Eleanor was the middle child, not the oldest, who bore the responsibility, or the youngest, who got the scraps of maternal attention. She was invisible, forgotten, the child who learned to steal food from school cafeterias because there was nothing at home. The girl who wore the same clothes for weeks because laundry wasn't a priority when your mother was high. She was 7 years old when she realized other families were different. Her 2nd grade teacher, Mrs. Peterson, had invited the class to share what they'd eaten for Thanksgiving dinner. Eleanor sat quietly while other children described turkey and stuffing and pumpkin pie. When Mrs. Peterson called on her, Eleanor said what she'd been trained to say. "We had a nice dinner. It was good." The lie tasted like ash. That night, she'd gone home to find her mother passed out on the couch, needle still in her arm. Her older brother, Danny, was gone, run away or arrested. Eleanor never knew which. Her younger sister, Melissa, was crying in a dirty diaper that probably hadn't been changed in hours. Eleanor was 7. She changed her sister's diaper, fed her crackers from a mostly empty box, put her to bed in a crib that smelled like urine and neglect, and she made a decision that night. A 7-year-old's decision that would shape everything that followed. She would never be powerless again. She would never be the person people forgot, the person who didn't matter, the person life happened to, instead of the person who controlled life. Whatever it took, however long it took, she would climb out of that trailer and become someone who mattered. By age 10, Eleanor had figured out how to work the system. She was charming in school, bright. Teachers loved her. She learned to mirror their expectations. Neat handwriting, perfect attendance, respectful behavior. She learned to make them see her as a victim worth saving, not a lost cause. Mrs. Chen, her 5th-grade teacher, was the first to really take an interest. An older Chinese woman, stern but kind, who noticed that Eleanor was too thin and wore clothes that never quite fit right. "Eleanor," Mrs. Chen said one day after class, "do you have enough food at home?" Eleanor knew the right answer, the answer that would make this woman feel good about herself, without actually requiring her to do anything difficult. "Sometimes it's tight," Eleanor said, making her eyes water but not cry. "But Mom does her best." Mrs. Chen packed her lunch for 2 months after that. Sandwiches, fruit, cookies. Eleanor ate them gratefully, saved half for Melissa, threw the other half away at school so she'd seem like she needed more, because she'd learned something crucial. People liked helping, but only to a point. If you needed too much, they got uncomfortable and backed away. The key was to need just enough, to be the redemption story that didn't require too much redemption. At 13, Child's Protective Services finally came. Someone had reported the conditions in the trailer. Eleanor watched social workers document the filth, the needles, her mother's incoherence. Watched them prepare to split up the family. "Please," Eleanor begged the lead social worker, a tired woman named Janet, "please don't separate us. My sister needs me. I can take care of her. I'm old enough." Janet looked at this 13-year-old girl, honor roll student, volunteer at the local library, never in trouble, and made a decision that would haunt her later. "All right, we'll keep you 2 together in a foster home. But your mother goes to rehab, and your brother is already in juvenile detention. This is your chance, Eleanor. Don't waste it." Eleanor didn't waste it. The foster home was clean, quiet, run by a couple named the Hartwicks, who'd been fostering children for 15 years. They had rules, structure, expectations. Eleanor followed every rule perfectly, made herself indispensable, helped with younger foster children, got straight A's, never caused problems. Within 6 months, she'd made herself so essential to the Hartwick household that when they discussed their annual budget and realized they could only keep 2 of their 4 foster children long-term, Eleanor wasn't even a question. She stayed. Melissa stayed. The other 2 children were transferred to different homes. Eleanor felt nothing about that. They were competition. Survival wasn't about fairness. At 16, the Hartwicks offered to legally adopt both girls. Eleanor accepted immediately. Melissa, only 11 and still traumatized, cried with relief. Eleanor Marie Kovach became Eleanor Marie Hartwick. Her past was sealed in foster care records. Her future was whatever she made it. She graduated high school as valedictorian, got a full scholarship to University of Oregon, studied business with a focus on pharmaceutical sales, a field she'd researched extensively, and determined offered the best combination of income, advancement opportunity, and networking. She dated strategically. Men who could introduce her to the right people. Men whose families had money and connections. She learned to dress right, speak right, be the kind of woman who fits seamlessly into country clubs and networking events. By the time she met Garrett Chen in that hospital cafeteria at age 27, Eleanor had completely reinvented herself. The trailer park girl was buried so deep, she almost believed the person she'd become was real. Almost. Their first date was at an upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Portland. Garrett showed up nervous, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt he'd clearly bought for the occasion. Sweet, trying so hard to impress her. Eleanor wore a simple black dress that cost more than his entire outfit, but looked effortless. She'd learned that trick from her MBA classmates. Never let them see the effort. Never let them know how carefully you constructed everything. Tell me about your family, she said over appetizers. Garrett's face brightened. My mom, Vivian, is amazing. Tough. She raised 3 boys by herself after my dad left. Worked 2 jobs. Put us all through school. She's my hero, honestly. Eleanor smiled, filed that information away. Close to his mother, that could be useful or problematic, depending. I have 2 brothers, Garrett continued. Thomas died 3 years ago. Car accident. He was driving drunk. Pain flickered across his face. That nearly destroyed my mom. Destroyed all of us, really. Marcus is the youngest. He's finding himself, I guess. Between jobs. Between apartments. Between everything. And you're the responsible one, Eleanor observed. Someone has to be. Garrett took a drink of wine. What about your family? Here it was. The moment Eleanor had prepared for since she was 16. I was adopted when I was 13, she said, allowing just the right amount of vulnerability into her voice. My biological mother had problems, addiction. My sister and I were taken in by wonderful people, the Hartwicks. They gave us everything. Stability, love, opportunity. She smiled sadly. I don't talk about the years before that much. It's not something I like to revisit. Garrett reached across the table, took her hand. You don't have to. I'm sorry you went through that. Perfect. He saw her as a survivor, someone who'd overcome hardship, someone strong but vulnerable, someone worth protecting. She'd learned this technique from watching other women who'd clawed their way up from nothing. Give them just enough truth to seem authentic, wrapped in enough vagueness to avoid questions. Make your trauma work for you without letting it define you. Tell me about your work, she said, changing the subject with practiced ease. What made you want to be a pediatric nurse? Garrett's eyes lit up again. Honestly, I wanted to help kids. I grew up watching my mom struggle to get us health care. We'd wait 6 hours in emergency rooms because we didn't have insurance for regular appointments. I'd see these kids, crying, in pain, scared, and their parents so stressed they could barely function. I wanted to be the person who made that better. And do you make it better? The light dimmed. Sometimes, not as often as I'd like. The system is broken, Eleanor. I see it every day. Kids who need care and can't get it. Parents who have to choose between medication and rent. He trailed off. Sorry, I'm killing the mood. No, Eleanor said softly. You're not. You care. That's rare. And she meant it. Garrett's earnest desire to help people was genuine, almost naive in its purity. He actually believed he could make a difference. Actually, thought individual actions mattered in a system designed to grind people down. It was adorable, pathetic, and exactly what she needed. Because Eleanor had learned something crucial during her pharmaceutical sales career. The helpers were the easiest to manipulate. The people who genuinely wanted to save the world were the ones who'd compromise the most to do it. They'd bend rules, ignore warning signs, rationalize bad decisions, all in service of the greater good. Garrett Chen, with his hero complex and his grief over his dead brother and his desperate need to matter, was perfect. Over the next 6 months, Eleanor carefully constructed their relationship. She was supportive, but not clingy. She attended his work events and charmed his colleagues. She met his mother and was the perfect potential daughter-in-law, respectful, helpful, interested in Vivian's stories. She watched Vivian carefully, studied her. The older woman was sharp, protective of her son. There was wariness in her eyes when she looked at Eleanor, like she couldn't quite figure her out. Eleanor made a note. Vivian would be a problem eventually, but not yet. For now, she needed to be the daughter-in-law Vivian wanted. In bed, Eleanor was exactly what Garrett needed. She learned his rhythms, his preferences, what made him feel masculine and desired. She had learned long ago that sex was currency, and she spent it strategically. And slowly, carefully, she began planting seeds. "You're so good at what you do," she'd say after Garrett came home exhausted from a shift. "You deserve more recognition, more respect. The system is broken," she'd agree when he vented about hospital bureaucracy. But what if there were ways to help people outside the system? Direct intervention. "You have such a gift for connecting with patients," she'd observe, "especially the vulnerable ones, the ones who need someone to really see them. Never pushing, never demanding, just planting ideas, letting them grow." At the 1-year mark, Garrett proposed. Sweet, earnest, down on one knee at Cannon Beach during sunset. Eleanor said yes, with tears in her eyes that were partially irreal, because she'd accomplished step 1. Find a man with resources, reputation, and a hero complex. Someone respectable. Someone who could give her the life she'd clawed her way toward. What Garrett didn't know was that Eleanor had been here before. 5 years before she met Garrett, Eleanor had been married to someone else. His name was David Brennan, 38 years old, a successful real estate developer. Divorced, no kids, looking for a young, attractive wife to complete his image of success. Eleanor had been 22, fresh out of college, working her first pharmaceutical sales job. She'd met David at a networking event. He'd been charming, wealthy, everything her trailer park childhood had taught her to want. They'd married after a 6-month courtship. Eleanor had thought she'd made it. Finally escaped her past completely. Had the house, the car, the husband with the important job. What she hadn't counted on was that David was as calculating as she was. The marriage lasted 11 months. It ended the night David came home early from a business trip and found Eleanor going through his home office files. She'd been looking for financial information, specifically trying to find out if David had been lying about his assets. She'd started noticing discrepancies, bills that didn't match his claimed income, debts he'd never mentioned. "Looking for something?" David asked from the doorway. Eleanor had frozen, then recovered. "I was organizing. I thought I'd help." "You thought you'd find out how much I'm actually worth. See if you married up or married down." David smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I know what you are, Eleanor. I've known since month 3. You're a hunter, a social climber. You saw me as a meal ticket. That's not—" "Don't." He held up his hand. "I'm not offended. I married you for the same reason. You're beautiful, young, presentable, good for my image. But here's the thing. I'm better at this game than you are. I've been playing it longer." He walked to his desk, pulled out a file, threw it at her feet. Eleanor Marie Kovach, born in a trailer park in Eugene. Mother was a meth addict. Spent 6 years in foster care before being adopted by the Hartwicks. Full scholarship to U of O because you needed it, not because you earned it academically. He smiled. Should I go on? Eleanor's blood turned to ice. You investigated me. Of course I did. You think I marry anyone without a background check? I know everything, Eleanor, including what you did when you were 17. Her heart stopped. I don't know what you're talking about. The fire at your biological mother's trailer, the one that killed her while she was passed out high, the one the fire marshal ruled accidental, cigarette left burning on the couch. David's eyes bored into her. But we both know it wasn't accidental, don't we? Because 3 people at your high school remember you saying, 6 months before it happened, that your mother would be better off dead, that Melissa would be safer if she was gone. Eleanor couldn't breathe, couldn't think. That fire had been 8 years ago. She'd been 17. No one had questioned it. Her mother had been a known addict with a history of dangerous behavior. The fire marshal had barely investigated. I don't care if you did or didn't, David interrupted. What matters is that it looks bad, real bad. And if I were to say, send this information to the right people, ask them to reopen the investigation, well, he shrugged, that could be very uncomfortable for you. What do you want? A divorce. You walk away quietly. No alimony. No claiming half my assets. You disappear from my life completely. And in exchange, I keep your secrets. Eleanor had signed the papers the next day. She'd taken nothing from the marriage except one crucial lesson. Never let anyone have power over you. Never let anyone know your real history. And never, ever trust that someone won't use your past against you. After the divorce, Eleanor had been more careful. She'd legally changed her name. Not fully, just a quiet modification of paperwork that made it harder to trace Eleanor Hartwick back to Eleanor Kovach. She'd paid a service to scrub her online presence. She'd rehearsed her backstory until even she sometimes forgot what was true and what was constructed. By the time she met Garrett, Eleanor Kovach was truly dead. Only Eleanor Hartwick remained, and this time she'd chosen better. Garrett wasn't like David. He wasn't calculating. He was earnest. He genuinely wanted to save people. He would never investigate her background because he wanted to believe her story, because he needed to believe that people could overcome their pasts. She could work with that, build a life on that. But there was still one problem. Eleanor first realized something was wrong with her when she was 9 years old. She'd been in the 3rd foster home by then, before the Hartwicks, during the chaos years when she and Melissa were shuttled between temporary placements. This home had a dog, a golden retriever named Sonny. Sonny was old, arthritic. He moved slowly and sometimes yelped in pain when the kids played too rough near him. Eleanor's foster mother at the time, Mrs. Patterson, loved that dog more than she seemed to love any of the children in her care. One day, Sonny had an accident on the carpet. Mrs. Patterson screamed at the children, even though none of them had caused it, blamed them for upsetting the dog, sent them all to their rooms without dinner. Eleanor lay in the bed she shared with Melissa, listening to her sister cry from hunger, and felt something cold and dark unfurl in her chest. The next morning, Sonny was dead. Mrs. Patterson found him in the backyard, peaceful, like he'd died in his sleep. The vet said it looked like heart failure, natural causes for an old dog. Eleanor had watched Mrs. Patterson sob over the dog's body and felt nothing, less than nothing. A kind of satisfaction that she didn't understand, but couldn't deny. She'd been 9 years old, and she'd killed that dog. Mixed rat poison into his food, carefully, over 3 days. She'd known Mrs. Patterson would find him outside, where he sometimes slept. She'd known it would look natural, and she'd known that the food in the house would no longer be rationed to save money for Sonny's expensive medication. The other children in the home got to eat more after Sonny died. They'd benefited from Eleanor's actions, even if they didn't know it. That's what she told herself. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. Eleanor had wanted to know if she could do it, if she could take a life without feeling guilt, if the emptiness inside her was as absolute as she suspected. It was. Over the years, she'd tested that emptiness in small ways. Never anything that would get her caught. Never anything that mattered to anyone but her. A classmate's cat that disappeared after the girl bullied Melissa. An elderly neighbor who'd complained about Eleanor's foster siblings making noise. She'd fallen down her basement stairs a week after Eleanor had mentioned how dark and dangerous those stairs were. Accidents. Always accidents. Always plausibly deniable. Eleanor wasn't a psychopath exactly. She could feel some emotions. She loved her sister Melissa in a possessive, protective way. She felt satisfaction when she accomplished goals. She felt anger when people threatened her plans. But empathy, guilt, remorse, those were foreign languages she'd learned to speak convincingly, but never truly understood. The psychological term was antisocial personality disorder, with narcissistic features. Though Eleanor had never been officially diagnosed, she'd been careful about that. Therapy was dangerous. Therapists asked questions, made notes, created records. Instead, she'd educated herself, read books about psychology, manipulation, social engineering, learned to mimic normal emotional responses so perfectly that even trained professionals wouldn't notice the void beneath. By the time she met Garrett, Eleanor had perfected her mask. She could cry on command, laugh at appropriate moments, express concern that seemed genuine. She'd studied empathy the way some people studied foreign languages, not because she felt it, but because she needed to speak it fluently to navigate the world. The question wasn't whether she loved Garrett. Love, for Eleanor, was a concept she understood intellectually, but not emotionally. He was useful, attractive, easy to manage. That was enough. The question was what she wanted from this marriage, beyond stability and respectability. And the answer came to her 6 months after their wedding, during a conversation that would change both their lives forever. Garrett came home from his shift at 2 a.m., later than usual. Eleanor was still awake, reading case studies on pharmaceutical interventions for PTSD. She'd been promoted to a specialty division and needed to stay current. "Rough night?" she asked as he collapsed on the couch beside her. "The worst." Garrett ran his hands through his dark hair. "We had a girl come in. 15. Overdose. We saved her, but..." He trailed off. "But what?" "Her foster parents didn't even show up. We called them 4 times. They said they couldn't leave work. Couldn't leave work for a kid who almost died." The anger in his voice was raw. "And this isn't the first time with her. She's been in our ER 7 times in 2 years. ODs, suicide attempts, injuries from God knows what. And every time, the system just fails her." Eleanor set down her papers. "That must be frustrating." "Frustrating?" Garrett laughed bitterly. "It's infuriating. These kids fall through every crack in the system. Foster care doesn't protect them. Schools don't notice them. Healthcare treats them like numbers. And then we act surprised when they end up dead or in prison. What would you do differently, if you could?" Garrett was quiet for a long time. Sometimes I think, what if there was a place? Not a foster home, not an institution, just somewhere safe, where kids like her could go and actually heal, actually be cared for by someone who gives a damn. Like a private facility, not formal like that. Something smaller, more personal, like, he struggled to articulate it, like a family, but for kids who don't have one, or whose families are toxic. Eleanor's mind started working, calculating. That's a beautiful idea. It's a fantasy. Would cost a fortune. Would require licenses, inspections, all the bureaucracy I hate. And even if I could set it up, the kids who need it most wouldn't trust it. They'd run. Not if they came voluntarily. If they felt saved rather than trapped. Garrett looked at her. What do you mean? Eleanor hadn't planned this conversation, hadn't thought through where it might lead, but as she spoke, the idea crystallized, with perfect, terrible clarity. What if you found these kids before the system did? The ones falling through cracks, the runaways, the ones nobody's looking for. What if you offered them something better than where they came from? Food, safety, medical care, everything they need. Just take them off the street without going through proper channels. The proper channels are what's failing them, Garrett. You said it yourself. Eleanor leaned forward. I'm not saying do anything illegal. I'm saying maybe sometimes the most compassionate thing is to work outside systems that don't work. Garrett frowned. That's a slippery slope, Eleanor. Is it? Or is letting kids die in the streets because we're too afraid to bend rules a different kind of slope? She was testing him, seeing how far his hero complex would stretch, seeing if the man who wanted to save everyone would consider methods that skirted legality in service of a greater good. I don't know, Garrett said finally. It's complicated. Everything worthwhile is complicated. Eleanor kissed his forehead. I'm going to bed. Think about it. Not necessarily doing anything, but thinking about what real compassion might look like outside the constraints we accept, without questioning. She went to bed, let the seed she'd planted take root. Over the next year, Eleanor brought up the concept periodically, never pushing, always framing it as compassion, as real help versus bureaucratic help, as saving lives versus following rules that let people die. And slowly, incrementally, Garrett's resistance eroded. What Eleanor hadn't told him, what she would never tell him, was that her idea wasn't about saving anyone. It was about control, because Eleanor had learned, through her childhood of powerlessness, that the greatest high wasn't having things. It was having power over people. Complete, absolute power. The kind where someone's entire existence depended on your mercy. Foster care had taught her that. She'd been powerless, subject to the whims of adults who could move her, punish her, discard her. She'd vowed never to be powerless again. But the inverse was intoxicating, being the adult with the power, the one who decided who ate and who went hungry, who was warm and who was cold, who was safe and who was hurt. She'd felt it in small ways over the years. The control she had over men she dated, the power she wielded in her job, deciding which drugs to push, which doctors to manipulate, the satisfaction of making her sister Melissa dependent on her for everything. But she wanted more. She wanted the absolute power that came from having someone completely at your mercy. Someone who couldn't leave, couldn't report you, couldn't do anything but submit to whatever you decided. And she'd realized, listening to Garrett talk about vulnerable teenagers nobody was looking for, that he could give her that. Not directly. Garrett would never consciously participate in abuse. His hero complex wouldn't allow it. But what if she could manipulate him into creating the situation? The isolated location, the hidden subjects, the complete control, and then slowly, over time, reveal her true nature. By then, he'd be complicit. Couldn't turn her in without destroying himself. Would be trapped by his own choices. It was perfect. 2 years into their marriage, Eleanor and Garrett bought the farmhouse outside Salem. It was perfect for Eleanor's plans. Isolated. 30 acres of land with no close neighbors. A full basement that could be renovated. And most importantly, Garrett had fallen in love with it. "We could raise a family here," he'd said, walking through the empty rooms. "Give our kids the kind of childhood I had. Space to run, peace and quiet." Eleanor had smiled and agreed. Didn't mention she had no intention of having children the traditional way. Pregnancy would disrupt her body, her plans, but she'd learned to play the long game. They renovated over 18 months. Eleanor oversaw most of it, since Garrett worked long hospital shifts. She made specific modifications to the basement, had a contractor install a reinforced door in what appeared to be a storage room, said it was for valuable medications she needed to store for work, a plausible cover. The contractor didn't ask questions. Eleanor paid in cash and gave him a generous tip. He finished the job and forgot about it. In month 20 of their marriage, Garrett came home with a story that made Eleanor's pulse quicken. "I met a girl today," he said over dinner. "Maybe 16, 17. Came into the ER with pneumonia. Gave a fake name, fake address. Clearly homeless. Clearly terrified of something. What happened to her? She ran, pulled out her IV, and bolted before we could treat her properly." Garrett pushed food around his plate. "She's going to die, Eleanor. That pneumonia will get worse, and she'll die alone on the street, and nobody will even know her real name." "That's terrible," Eleanor said, making her voice soft and concerned. "I've been thinking about what you said, about helping outside the system." Garrett looked at her. "What if I'd brought her here, given her antibiotics, a warm bed, actual care? She'd have gotten better, trusted me eventually, maybe told me her real story. You think she'd have come? If I'd approached it right, maybe. If I'd emphasized safety, not obligation. No authorities, no questions, just help." He met her eyes. "Is that crazy?" This was the moment, the inflection point. Eleanor could shut this down, keep her husband as the earnest but ineffective helper he'd always been. Or she could push him over the edge into the darkness where she lived. "It's not crazy," she said carefully. "It's compassionate, maybe even necessary. But illegal, is it? If someone comes willingly, if you're providing medical care, if no one's being harmed." Eleanor reached across the table, took his hand. "Garrett, you save lives every day within a system that ties your hands. What if, just once, you saved someone without those constraints? What if she doesn't want to leave after I've helped her? What if she wants to stay, needs to stay? Because going back means death. Then she stays, until she's ready." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "You're not kidnapping anyone. You're offering sanctuary." Garrett was quiet for a long time. "I need to think about this." "Of course, take your time." But Eleanor knew she had him. The hook was set. Now she just needed patience. 3 months later, Garrett brought home the first girl. Her name was Cassidy, 17 years old, runaway from an abusive home in Washington State. She'd been living on the streets of Portland for 6 months when she collapsed outside the hospital where Garrett worked. He'd found her during his break, checked her vitals, realized she was severely malnourished and showing signs of sepsis from an infected wound on her leg. "I can help you," he'd told her, "but not here. Too many questions. I have a place. Safe. Warm. I can treat you properly. Cassidy had been too sick to argue. Too desperate. Garrett brought her to the farmhouse. Took her to the basement, recovery room Eleanor had prepared. Medical equipment. A bed. Everything needed to treat her. Eleanor watched from the stairs as Garrett tended to this girl with gentle efficiency. Started an IV, cleaned the wound, administered antibiotics. He was in his element, saving someone, being the hero. Cassidy recovered over 2 weeks. Garrett visited her multiple times a day, brought food, changed bandages, talked to her. "When can I leave?" Cassidy asked on day 10. "Soon," Garrett promised. "When you're stronger. When we're sure you won't relapse." But Eleanor had been working during those 2 weeks, talking to Cassidy when Garrett wasn't there, asking questions, learning her story, discovering that Cassidy had no family looking for her, no friends who knew where she was. She was a ghost. Perfect. "What if she doesn't want to leave?" Eleanor asked Garrett one night. "What do you mean?" "She has nowhere to go, Garrett. If you send her back to the streets, she'll be in the same situation that nearly killed her. Is that compassionate? She can't stay here forever." "Why not?" "For a while, at least. Until we help her get on her feet. Find real housing, a job, stability." Eleanor paused. "Unless you don't want to fully commit to saving her." The manipulation was subtle. Question his commitment to his ideals. Make keeping her seem like the compassionate choice. Cassidy stayed. At first, she had freedom. Could move around the basement. Talk to them. She seemed grateful. Healing. But Eleanor started planting seeds. Small comments to Garrett when Cassidy wasn't listening. "I saw her looking at the car keys today. Do you think she's planning to leave?" She was asking about the nearest town. Seemed suspicious. "What if she tells someone about this? About you treating her off the books? You could lose your nursing license." Garrett started to worry. Started seeing Cassidy's normal questions as threats. Started thinking maybe she needed more supervision. For her own safety, of course. And his. The door to her room got a lock. For security, they told her, so she'd feel safe. Then the lock started being used to keep her in. Just at night. Just when they weren't home. Just to be careful. Cassidy noticed. Started to panic. Started demanding to leave. "You're not well enough yet," Garrett insisted. "Just a few more weeks." Those weeks turned into months. Eleanor watched it happen. Watched her husband's heroism curdle into something darker. Watched him rationalize each escalation. And she encouraged it, subtly, always from a place of seeming concern. "She seems agitated. Maybe she needs something to calm her down. You have access to medications. If she's this unstable, maybe it's good she's here. Imagine if she was on the streets in this condition. You've done so much for her. It's not your fault she doesn't appreciate it." 6 months after bringing Cassidy home, Garrett had become someone Vivian wouldn't recognize. Someone who kept a girl locked in his basement and called it rescue. And Eleanor felt nothing but satisfaction. But there was a problem. Cassidy wasn't enough. Eleanor had tasted the power of complete control and wanted more, needed more. The high was already fading. She needed Garrett to bring home another girl. It took 4 months to convince Garrett to do it again. Cassidy had been with them for 10 months when Eleanor started the campaign. "She's lonely down there," Eleanor observed. "Isolated. That can't be healthy." Garrett frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "Nothing specific. Just, if you encountered another girl in crisis, someone like Cassidy was when you found her, maybe having a companion would help them both. They could support each other, heal together." "Eleanor, I'm not running a shelter." "No, you're saving lives." 1 became 2. 2 is still saving lives. She let it rest. Brought it up occasionally, always casual, always framed as compassion. Then fate intervened. Lacey Henderson walked into Sacred Heart Hospital for her nursing clinical rotation. 19 years old, bright, idealistic. She reminded Garrett of himself at that age. They worked together for 3 weeks. Garrett mentored her, gave her advice, saw himself in her determination to help people. Eleanor met Lacey once when she visited Garrett at work, studied her. Young, naive, trusting, perfect. She's sweet, Eleanor said on the drive home. Reminds me of how you described yourself in nursing school. She's a good kid, going to be a great nurse. Does she have family nearby? No, she's from California, moved up here for school, lives alone in a studio apartment. Garrett glanced at her. Why? Just making conversation. But Eleanor was calculating. A nursing student from out of state. Limited social connections, predictable schedule, easy to track, easy to acquire. 2 weeks later, Lacey disappeared from the hospital parking lot after a late shift. Garrett came home that night looking shaken. Lacey's missing. Police are investigating. They think it might be the same person who took those other girls last year. That's terrible. Eleanor put her arms around him. You worked with her. You must feel awful. I do. Garrett pulled away, paced. I saw her that night. She was walking to her car. I was in my truck. I could have offered her a ride, could have made sure she got home safe. It's not your fault, isn't it? He turned to face her. How many times have we talked about the system failing people? About how we could do better? And then I see someone I actually know, someone vulnerable, and I do nothing. Eleanor's pulse quickened. What are you saying? I'm saying, maybe if I'd brought her here, like Cassidy, she'd be safe right now. Instead, she's God knows where with God knows who, doing God knows what to her. Eleanor walked to him, took his face in her hands. Garrett, you can't save everyone. You can't predict every tragedy. Can't I? His eyes were wild. I had the opportunity, the moment. I could have said, hey Lacey, it's late. Let me give you a ride. Instead, I drove past her because I was tired and wanted to get home. This wasn't how Eleanor had planned it, but it was better. Garrett was spiraling into guilt, vulnerable, suggestible. What's done is done, she said softly. You can't change the past, but if the opportunity ever presents itself again, maybe you'll make a different choice. Garrett didn't answer, just stared out the window into the darkness. 3 days later, he brought Lacey home. Eleanor was making dinner when Garrett came through the garage door with Lacey Henderson unconscious in his arms. Help me, he said. His voice was strange, flat, like he was in shock. Eleanor didn't ask questions, just followed him to the basement, to the room next to Cassidy's that they'd prepared months ago. Watched him lay Lacey on the bed, check her pulse, her breathing. She's sedated, Garrett said. I gave her something at the hospital. Said she needed to rest after her shift. Then, I brought her here. Garrett, I saved her. He looked at Eleanor with desperate eyes. Whoever took her was going to hurt her, maybe kill her. But I found her first. I saved her. Eleanor understood. Garrett had rewritten the narrative in his head. He wasn't the kidnapper. He was the rescuer who'd prevented the kidnapping, the hero who'd protected her from the real villain. The rationalization was almost beautiful in its completeness. Of course you did, Eleanor said. You saved her life. She'll understand eventually when she realizes I kept her safe. She will. But Lacey didn't understand. When she woke hours later and realized where she was, she screamed, begged, promised not to tell anyone if Garrett would just let her go. Garrett tried to explain, tried to make her see that he'd rescued her, that she was safe here, that this was compassionate. Lacey didn't see it that way. The screaming disturbed Cassidy in the next room. She started screaming too, both girls, crying and pleading through the walls. Eleanor watched Garrett crumble, watched him realize what he'd actually done, watched the last of his heroic self-image crack. "I'm a monster," he whispered. Eleanor took his hands. "No, you're a man who cares too much in a world that cares too little. These girls don't understand now, but they will, once they realize the streets would have killed them. Once they see you only want to help. They hate me. They're scared. Fear passes. Gratitude remains." It was a lie. Eleanor knew it was a lie. But Garrett needed to believe it. Needed to believe he was still the hero of this story. So she reinforced that belief. Daily. Constantly. Reframing his actions. Making him see himself as savior rather than captor. And, for a while, it worked. Garrett convinced himself he was helping. That once the girls calmed down, they'd understand. But Eleanor had different plans. She'd never intended for this to stay rescue. That was Garrett's delusion, necessary to get him to participate. Eleanor's goal was darker, simpler. She wanted to own these girls, completely, have total power over their existence, make them understand that she decided if they ate, if they were warm, if they lived or died. It was the ultimate control, the ultimate power, the thing she'd craved since she was 9 years old and killing that dog. So while Garrett tried to be kind to his captives, bringing them books, asking about their interests, trying to build rapport, Eleanor did the opposite when he wasn't there. She withheld food, kept the basement cold, made them understand that Garrett's mercy was conditional on her approval. "He listens to me," she told Cassidy one day. "If I tell him you're trouble, you'll go hungry. If I say you're dangerous, you'll be restrained. Your comfort depends on keeping me happy." Cassidy learned to fear Eleanor more than Garrett. So did Lacey, and Eleanor felt alive, truly alive. For the first time since childhood, she felt the rush of absolute power. But she needed more. Over the next 2 years, the basement filled. Garrett brought home 4 more girls, each time with elaborate rationalizations, each time convinced he was saving them from worse fates. Sienna Watkins, the 16-year-old soccer player, was number 3. Garrett had seen her walking home from practice, told himself she was in danger, that kidnapping her was prevention. Madison Torres, 15, was number 4. Runaway from California. No one looking for her. Easy to justify. Amber Chen, 17. The name had twisted something in Garrett when he learned it. The same surname as his own family, was number 5. She'd been in foster care, aging out of the system. Garrett told himself he was offering her family. And Kira Bell, 16, was number 6. She'd come into the ER after a suicide attempt. Garrett had decided she needed protection from herself. 6 girls, all teenagers, all vulnerable, all completely at their mercy. Eleanor had created a system. Garrett handled medical care and the emotional manipulation he called rehabilitation. Eleanor handled discipline and control. The basement became her kingdom. She decided who got blankets, who got real food versus protein bars, who got to shower and who stayed filthy, who got kindness and who got cruelty. She made them understand the hierarchy. Garrett was the soft parent. Eleanor was the hard one. Garrett could be manipulated with tears and compliance. Eleanor could not. Some of the girls tried to befriend her, tried to appeal to feminine solidarity. Didn't work. Eleanor felt nothing for them except ownership. One girl, Madison, tried to escape once, picked her lock, made it halfway up the basement stairs before Eleanor caught her. "Please," Madison begged. "I won't tell. I just want to go home." Eleanor had smiled. "You are home, and you need to learn what happens when you disobey." She'd locked Madison in complete darkness for 3 days. No food, no water, no blankets, just darkness and cold and fear. When Garrett found out, he was horrified. "Eleanor, what did you do?" "I taught her a lesson you were too soft to teach. These girls need boundaries, structure. They need to understand there are consequences. This isn't what we agreed." "What we agreed?" Eleanor's mask slipped for just a moment. "You agreed to keep kidnapped girls in your basement and call it rescue. Don't pretend you're too moral for tough discipline." Garrett had backed down. Because she was right. He'd crossed so many lines already. What was one more? That was Eleanor's genius. Every escalation seemed small compared to the initial crime. Every new cruelty was just a shade darker than the last. Garrett adjusted his moral compass incrementally, never noticing how far he'd drifted. By year 3, they had 6 girls locked in that basement, 6 families grieving, 6 communities searching, 6 missing person cases that would never be solved because nobody looked in the basement of a respected pediatric nurse and his pharmaceutical sales rep wife. And then Garrett made a mistake. He got Eleanor pregnant. Eleanor had been careful about contraception for years. She didn't want children, didn't want the vulnerability of pregnancy or the burden of childcare. But Garrett had wanted kids, pushed for it. And Eleanor had made a calculation. Refusing might make him suspicious, might make him question her, might make him see her clearly for the first time. So she'd agreed, gotten pregnant, hated every moment. The pregnancy was difficult, complications, bed rest. Eleanor spent 6 months unable to manage her basement kingdom personally, had to rely on Garrett and remote camera monitoring. She gave birth to twins, Lily and Elijah, via emergency C-section at 32 weeks. Premature, but healthy. Eleanor felt nothing when she looked at them. No maternal bond, no surge of love, just awareness that these babies were now leverage, assets, complications. Garrett, meanwhile, was transformed. He loved those babies with desperate intensity. They became his redemption in his own mind, proof he could create life and nurture it, not just steal and confine it. "They're perfect," he said, holding Lily while Elijah slept. "They're our second chance, our proof that we can do this right." Eleanor let him believe that, let him pour his guilt and hope into those babies. Meanwhile, she plotted how to regain control of her basement. The problem was Vivian. Garrett's mother had come to help with the twins, moved into the guest room, was present constantly, witnessed everything. Well, almost everything. Eleanor and Garrett became experts at hiding their secret. The basement door stayed locked. They took turns checking on the girls at night when Vivian was asleep. They maintained perfect normalcy, but Vivian was smart, observant. Eleanor saw the way the older woman watched them, studying, suspicious. "She's a problem," Eleanor told Garrett 3 months in. "Your mother sees too much. She's just helping with the twins. She's been here 3 months. The twins are stable. We need our space back. Mom's not going anywhere until she's sure we can handle everything." Eleanor had wanted to scream. Vivian was in the way, witnessing patterns, noticing locked doors and strange hours and behavior that didn't quite make sense. Eleanor started planning how to get rid of her, send her back to Portland, create some emergency that required her presence elsewhere. But before she could execute any plan, Vivian had discovered everything on her own. That night, when she'd heard crying, when she'd tried to get sheets from the basement, when she'd felt the locked door and heard sounds that didn't belong. Eleanor had known immediately, had seen it in Vivian's face the next morning. The older woman knew something was wrong, was suspicious, would investigate. "We need to get her out of this house," Eleanor told Garrett. "Today. Now. Before she finds something." "What would she find? She doesn't have access to the basement." "She's smart, Garrett, and she loves you. If she thinks you're in trouble, she'll dig. We need her gone." They'd told Vivian she needed to leave by the weekend. Thought they'd have time to clean up, move evidence, prepare. They hadn't counted on Vivian taking the twins. The night Vivian ran with the twins, Eleanor's carefully constructed world began to collapse. She'd stood in the empty children's rooms, seeing the picked locks, understanding what had happened, and felt something she rarely experienced. Fear. Not fear for the children. Eleanor didn't care about Lily and Elijah beyond their usefulness. Fear for herself, for her freedom, for everything she'd built. "She knows," Eleanor said to Garrett. "Your mother knows about the girls. She can't. We've been careful. She went through your phone. While we were distracted, I saw her taking photos of something earlier this week. I thought she was just being a grandmother, but she was building evidence." Garrett's face went white. "My photos. The ones I kept for records." "Yes, your photos. Of our girls. Our prisoners. Your kidnapping victims." Eleanor's voice was ice. "She has proof, Garrett. Real proof. And she took the twins to make sure we can't use them as leverage. They chased Vivian, lost her on back roads, returned home to an empty house and the realization that everything was about to implode." "What do we do?" Garrett asked. He looked lost, broken. The boy who'd wanted to save people was gone, replaced by a man who'd destroyed lives and couldn't face it. Eleanor made a decision. "We move the girls, tonight. Get them to the Idaho property. Clean this place top to bottom. Destroy evidence. Eleanor, it's over. Mom will go to the police. They'll investigate. We can't hide. We can if there's nothing to find. We move fast. We're smart. We can still control this." She'd already been thinking about the Idaho property, a cabin Garrett had inherited from his father, isolated, off-grid, perfect for relocating their collection. But even as she planned, Eleanor knew the truth. It was over. Vivian had won. The question was how much damage control they could do before the authorities arrived. They'd spent the next 6 hours moving the girls. Drugged them first. Couldn't risk them screaming during transport. Loaded them into a van Eleanor had rented weeks ago under a fake name. Drove through the night to Idaho. By the time they returned to Oregon at dawn, Eleanor knew their time was limited. Hours, maybe. Days, if they were lucky. "I need you to listen carefully," she told Garrett as they cleaned the basement. "When the police come, and they will come, you let me do the talking. We stick to the story. Your mother is having a breakdown. Grief over Thomas. Delusions about us. Everything she says is paranoid fantasy. They'll investigate anyway. Let them. There's no evidence here anymore. The girls are gone. The basement is clean. Your phone is destroyed. It's her word against ours. What about the girls? When they're found, if they're found, Idaho is remote. And if they are found, they've been moved so many times, been so traumatized. Their testimony will be unreliable. We say we know nothing. Some other predator must have taken them. We're victims of false accusation." It was a thin plan. Eleanor knew it. But it was their only option. She hadn't counted on Vivian being smarter than that. Hadn't counted on her coming back to the house with her daughter Maya. Hadn't counted on them freeing the girls, who hadn't been moved yet, because Eleanor had run out of time. When Eleanor had descended those basement stairs and seen Vivian standing there, seen the freed prisoners, seen her perfect control disintegrating, she'd felt something new. Rage. Pure, absolute rage. That this ordinary old woman had destroyed everything Eleanor had built. She'd grabbed the gun, pointed it at Vivian, meant to pull the trigger, and Garrett had stopped her. Her husband, her accomplice, her perfectly manipulated puppet, had chosen his mother over her in that critical moment. Eleanor had run, left Garrett to face the consequences alone, saved herself. She'd made it 3 miles before police stopped her car, arrested her at gunpoint, read her rights while she stayed silent. In the police car, handcuffed, Eleanor finally understood something crucial about herself. She'd never actually been in control. Not of Garrett, not of the situation, not even of herself. She'd thought she was the puppet master. Turned out she was just another broken person from a broken childhood, acting out trauma she didn't have the capacity to heal. The realization didn't make her sad, didn't make her regret anything. It just was. The interrogation room was gray, cold, uncomfortable. Eleanor sat across from 2 detectives, a woman named Rivera and a man named Thompson. They'd been asking questions for 3 hours. Eleanor hadn't answered any of them. "You have the right to remain silent," Rivera said. "But silence looks bad, Eleanor. Makes you seem guilty." Eleanor smiled. "I have nothing to say without my lawyer. Your husband is talking, telling us everything. Then you don't need me to say anything." Thompson leaned forward. "Help us understand. Were you coerced? Was Garrett controlling you? Were you scared of him?" They were offering her an out. The battered woman defense. Blame everything on Garrett. Claim she was a victim, too. Eleanor almost laughed. They had no idea who they were dealing with. "I have nothing to say without my lawyer," she repeated. The lawyer arrived an hour later. Expensive. One Eleanor had researched years ago for exactly this scenario. She'd always known this might happen, had always prepared. "Don't say anything," the lawyer advised. "Let them build their case. We'll see what evidence they actually have." The evidence was substantial. Garrett had indeed talked, told police everything. The timeline, the victims, the methods, and crucially, Eleanor's role. "She orchestrated it," Garrett said in his recorded confession. "I thought I was helping people. But Eleanor, she knew what we were doing. She enjoyed it. The control, the power. I was weak, and she exploited that. Made me into someone I never wanted to be." Eleanor listened to the recording in a later meeting with her lawyer. Heard Garrett throw her under the bus to save himself, paint himself as the manipulated one, her as the master manipulator. She felt nothing but contempt. He'd been so easy, so eager to believe his own hero narrative, so desperate for purpose that he'd let her twist him into a monster and convince him it was salvation. "They're offering a deal," her lawyer said. 25 years if you testify against Garrett. Confirm he was the primary actor. Support his claim that you were coerced. No, Eleanor, without the deal, you're looking at life. Multiple counts of kidnapping, conspiracy, false imprisonment. The prosecutor wants to add murder charges if any of the girls die from complications related to their captivity. I'm not testifying against Garrett. Why? He's testifying against you. He's painting you as the villain. Why protect him? Eleanor was quiet for a long time. Because he's not wrong. I was the villain. I am the villain. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise to save myself. It was the most honest thing she'd said in years. The lawyer stared at her. You're throwing your life away. No, I'm accepting what I always knew would happen eventually. People like me don't win forever. We just win for a while. The trial was a media sensation. News vans camped outside the courthouse. Headlines screamed, "House of Horrors," "The Nurse and the Monster," "Suburban Nightmare." Garrett and Eleanor were tried separately. Garrett went first. His defense strategy was clear: diminished capacity, manipulation by Eleanor, genuine belief he was helping. The prosecution painted him as a predator who used his nursing skills to target vulnerable girls, called victims to testify about the medical care he'd provided, care that kept them alive but trapped, care that was simultaneously merciful and monstrous. Garrett cried on the stand, talked about his brother's death, his desire to save people, how Eleanor had twisted that desire into something evil. "I thought I was rescuing them," he said, voice breaking. "I genuinely believed I was keeping them safe. It wasn't until the end that I realized what I'd become." The jury saw a broken man, deluded, but not entirely evil, manipulated by a master manipulator. They convicted him on all counts, but recommended leniency. 50 years with possibility of parole after 25. Eleanor's trial was different. She didn't cry, didn't show remorse, sat stone-faced through testimony from the girls she'd terrorized, through Vivian's heartbreaking account of discovering her son's crimes, through psychiatric experts who diagnosed her with antisocial personality disorder and explained she likely had no capacity for guilt. The prosecution called her the architect of evil. The defense tried to paint her childhood as mitigating: the trailer park, the abuse, the survival mechanisms that had gone too far. Eleanor refused to testify, refused to let her lawyers paint her as a victim of her own trauma. When given the chance to make a statement before sentencing, she stood. "I have nothing to say except this. I knew what I was doing. I knew it was wrong. I did it anyway. Not because of my childhood. Not because Garrett manipulated me. I did it because I wanted to. That's the truth no one wants to hear. Some people are just broken, and I was always broken." The courtroom was silent. The judge sentenced her to life without possibility of parole. As they led her away, Eleanor looked back one time, saw Vivian sitting in the gallery, holding her grandchildren, saw the old woman meet her eyes. Vivian didn't look angry. She looked sad, like she'd hoped for a different ending even after everything. Eleanor looked away first. Eleanor had been in prison for 3 years when Melissa visited for the first time. Her sister, the person Eleanor had protected as children, the person she'd thought she loved in her limited way. They sat across from each other in the visiting room. Melissa looked good, healthy. She'd gained weight, looked less haunted. "I'm getting married," Melissa said. "I wanted to tell you in person. Congratulations. His name is David. He's a teacher. Good man. Kind." Melissa twisted her hands. "I'm not inviting you to the wedding, obviously, but I thought you should know. I understand." "Do you?" Melissa leaned forward. "Do you understand any of this, Eleanor? What you did? What you were? I understand I did terrible things, but do you feel anything about it? Any remorse? Anything?" Eleanor considered lying, telling Melissa what she wanted to hear, that she was sorry, that she'd changed, that prison had reformed her. But she was tired of performing. "No," she said simply, "I don't feel remorse. I understand intellectually that what I did was wrong, that I hurt people, but I don't feel it. I never did. I'm wired wrong, Melissa. I always have been." Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "I used to think you saved me. When we were kids, I thought you were my hero. But you weren't, were you? You were just controlling me, the same way you controlled those girls." "Yes. And you don't even feel bad about that. I'm glad you're okay. I'm glad you found someone kind. But no, I don't feel bad. I can't. Melissa stood. This is the last time you'll see me. I'm changing my name, moving away, building a life where I'm not Eleanor Kovach's sister or Eleanor Hartwick's sister. I'm just Melissa. Good. You should do that. Goodbye, Eleanor. Goodbye. Melissa left. Eleanor watched her go. Felt nothing, not even loneliness. She returned to her cell, to the life she'd have for the rest of her days. Alone, controlled by others for the first time since she was 13. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent her life seeking absolute power over others. And now she had no power at all, was subject to bells and schedules and guards' whims. Karma, some people would call it. Justice. Eleanor called it inevitable. She'd always known, deep down, that this was how it would end. People like her didn't ride off into sunsets. They ended up in cages or graves. She'd just enjoyed the ride while it lasted. In a different prison, 300 miles away, Garrett Chen was a model inmate. He worked in the prison medical clinic, helped other inmates with minor health issues, taught literacy classes, participated in rehabilitation programs. Everyone who met him said the same thing. He seemed genuinely remorseful, truly changed. If anyone deserved a second chance, it was Garrett. His mother visited monthly, brought pictures of Lily and Elijah, now 8 years old, thriving in her care. They'd been through years of therapy, were slowly healing. They ask about you sometimes, Vivian said during one visit. I tell them the truth, that you made terrible mistakes, but you're still their father, that people can do very bad things and still be people. Do they hate me? They don't understand enough to hate you yet. Maybe someday they will. Maybe they won't. I don't know, Garrett. Vivian's voice was tired. I don't know how to help them make sense of what their father did. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything, for what I put you through, what I put them through. I know you are. I believe you are. She paused. But sorry doesn't give those girls back their years, doesn't undo their trauma. Sorry is just a word. Then what do I do? How do I live with what I've done? You don't get to live with it comfortably. You carry it every day. You let it hurt. And maybe, if you're very lucky, you use that pain to understand what you took from people, what you stole, and you spend the rest of your life, however much of it you have, trying to be better than what you became. Garrett thought about that conversation often in his cell, thought about the girls he'd imprisoned, wondered if any of them would ever truly heal, wondered if forgiveness was even something he should hope for. Sienna Watkins had returned to school, finished her degree, but she didn't play soccer anymore, couldn't be in enclosed spaces without panicking. Lacey Henderson had dropped out of nursing school. The career she'd dreamed of was now a trigger. She worked at a bookstore and lived with her parents. The others had similar stories. Lives derailed, futures stolen, trust destroyed. All because Garrett had convinced himself his heroism mattered more than their freedom. 25 years stretched ahead of him, a quarter century to sit with what he'd done, to understand how easily good intentions curdled into evil when paired with ego and manipulation. He wrote letters to the victims, sent them through the prison system, expected none of them to write back. They didn't, except one. 3 years into his sentence, he received a letter from Sienna. I don't forgive you. I may never forgive you. But I need you to know something. I'm still here. You tried to erase me, lock me away, make me disappear. But I survived. I'm living. I'm fighting. And every day I continue to exist and build a life is a day that proves you failed. You don't get to be the end of my story. You're just a dark chapter I'm learning to live past. I'm writing this, not for you, but for me, to prove I'm strong enough to face what you did and still move forward. You took a year of my life. You don't get another day. Sienna. Garrett read that letter 100 times. Let it destroy him. Let it rebuild him. Because Sienna was right. His victims weren't defined by what he'd done to them. They were people, full people, with lives and futures and strength he'd tried to break but couldn't. They were survivors. He was just the man who'd failed to destroy them. And maybe that was his only redemption, knowing that even at his worst, even as a monster, he hadn't won. The people he'd hurt were still here, still fighting, still refusing to let him be their ending. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. But it was truth. And truth, Garrett was learning, was the only thing that could carry him through the decades ahead. 5 years after the trial, Vivian received an unexpected letter. It was from Eleanor. Brief, to the point. I know you have no reason to respond to this, but I'm requesting a visit. Not for my sake, for yours. I have information you might want. About Garrett. About what really happened. About things you don't know yet. If you're interested, the prison allows visitors on Thursdays. Eleanor. Vivian stared at that letter for a week. Discussed it with Maya, with her therapist, with the support group she'd joined for relatives of criminals. Don't go, Maya said. She's manipulating you. It's what she does. Maybe, Vivian agreed. But maybe there are things I need to know. For the twins. For understanding what happened to my son. Against everyone's advice, Vivian went. The visiting room was exactly as depressing as she'd imagined. Gray walls, plastic chairs, guards watching everything. Eleanor entered, wearing prison orange. No makeup. Hair pulled back. She looked older, harder, but her eyes were the same. Cold, calculating, empty. They sat across from each other, studied each other. Why did you come? Eleanor asked. You said you had information. I do. But first tell me, how are the twins? That's none of your concern. Fair enough. Eleanor leaned back. I'll get to the point. Garrett didn't tell you everything. In his confession, in his trial, in all his remorseful interviews, he left things out. Like what? Like the fact that I wasn't the one who started this. He was. Eleanor's voice was matter of fact. I planted seeds, yes. I encouraged. I manipulated. But the first girl, Cassidy, Garrett brought her home on his own before I ever suggested it. He was already thinking about it, already rationalizing how keeping someone could be rescue. I just gave him permission to act on what he already wanted. Vivian felt cold. You're lying. Am I? Ask yourself, why would Garrett be so easy to manipulate if the darkness wasn't already there? I didn't create a monster, Vivian. I just gave him permission to become what he already was becoming. That's not true. Garrett was good. He wanted to help people. And so did I once. When I was young and hadn't figured out yet that helping people was just another form of control. Eleanor smiled without warmth. We're not that different, your son and I. We just expressed our brokenness in similar ways. The difference is, I owned it. He never did. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to stop believing the narrative that I corrupted your innocent son. Garrett made choices. Every day, every girl, every lock. He chose. And he'd choose again if given the opportunity, because at his core, he believes he knows better than other people what they need. That's not something I taught him. That's who he was. Vivian stood. You're trying to hurt me, to make me doubt Garrett, to spread your poison even from this hellhole. You are evil.